machine patchwork case. If we haven't met before, my name is Claire. I run a slow fashion label where I make clothing and accessories from tea towels and tablecloths. Originally, I made one of these sewing machine covers for myself. I put it up on my stories and I got a lot of heat from it. I will put all the links below on where to download these templates. Let's get into it. Use the test square to check that it measures correctly. You can assemble your pattern any way you like. Just make sure you match up the grey triangles and the guides. It should look like this when you're done. When cutting out your paper pattern pieces, it doesn't matter whether you cut along the inside or the outside of the line. Just be consistent for all pieces. This part here is optional, but I do recommend it. Roughly cut out your square template. Grab some cardboard or thick paper. Glue your square template onto the cardboard. Then using a ruler and a craft knife and a cutting mat, carefully cut around the edges. That's it. You got a sturdier template that's easy to trace onto the fabric, and you can reuse this for future patchwork projects. For this project, I'm going to use an unwanted tea towel with a mix of some fabric scraps. Once your fabric is ironed, grab your template and trace it onto the fabric. You want to do this until you have 28 squares. Go ahead and cut them out as you go. Now for the fun part, choosing what goes where. You want to have 4 squares going this way and 7 squares going this way. If you're using a fabric with a directional print, keep in mind which part of the cover will be the front, the back, and the top. Next, we are going to sew our rows together. Optional but recommended. Take a photo of your layout now to stay organized. An easy way to sew your squares is by pinning them right sides together in pairs. Keep adding squares in a row. You'll end up with a chain of squares all hanging from the pins like this. Join each square with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Continue doing this for each row. If you're a confident sewer and you've done patchwork before, or your fabric is forgiving in a way where it doesn't have a directional print, you can do this any way you want. I just found this was the easiest way to sew each square without getting confused. Time to iron those seams. A little tip is to have a spray bottle with clean water and spray your fabric before or while you're ironing. This helps loosen up the fibers so the iron can press them flat more easily. Press the seams of row 1 to one side. For row 2, press the seams in the opposite direction. Repeat this, alternating the directions of your pressing for rows 3 and 4. This helps the seams to nest neatly when the rows are joined. And don't forget to give them a good press on the right side as well. Place row 4 on top of row 3, right sides together. Pin these 2 rows together. Feel free to put more pins along this raw edge. Repeat this by putting rows 3 onto row 2, right sides together. Then row 2 onto row 1. Sew rows together with a 6mm 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure these seam junctions right here match up when you're sewing. If you have any bits hanging off the edge like this, go ahead and cut them. We want this to be flush. Press all your newly made seams to one side, then give your patchwork rectangle a final press on the right side. Lay your main front right sides facing up on your batting/wadding. Cut your batting 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch larger than your patchwork rectangle. This is where your adhesive spray comes in handy. Make sure everything is smooth and flat before spraying. I like to put a drop sheet down first so the spray doesn't go everywhere. And make sure you're in a well-ventilated space. Grab your patchwork rectangle and place it on your batting right sides facing up. Grab your spray and lightly spray around the edges, starting with one side and working your way across. Take the fabric you're using for the lining and give it a quick press with the iron if needed. Lay it out flat. Then place your patchwork piece with the batting attached on top of your lining. Use this as a template to cut the lining to the same size. Turn your batting facing up and place your lining on top of your batting. Smooth it out, making sure your lining sits flat, and spray your lining onto your batting. If you don't have any of this spray, you can just use safety pins or normal pins and you can just space them out in each square. To keep all of our layers in place, turn your sewing machine to the longest stitch length and sew a basting stitch around your rectangle's raw edge. Don't forget to set your stitch length back to normal when you're finished. Now it's time to quilt. Use your favorite quilting method. If you want to learn how to hand tie, I'll pop the link right here. Once quilting is done, lay your paper pattern on top and trim the panel to shape. Don't worry if your front panel is slightly smaller. Just make sure the edges are straight and even and all the layers are within the seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter. Please note that all sewing machines are different sizes, so refer to the final measurements in your downloaded files to see if you need to trim it back a little bit more. Place your patchwork rectangle to one side. Now we are on to our side panels. Cut your main side panels out. If you're cutting out pockets, go ahead and cut them out too. There is an option here. If you've got interfacing, fuse it onto your pocket to make it a bit stiffer. If you chose to do a different quilting method for your main front block, you want to do the same for your sides. Don't attach your pocket until you've sandwiched all your layers together and quilted. For your pockets, fold the top raw edge down twice, 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch, and stitch. Press your turn on turn and pin your pockets in place on the side panel, right sides facing up. Then base stitch with a 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, just to hold the pockets in place, like this. This process is the same that you did before to your main. Sandwich all layers on top of each other. With your side panel, your batting and your lining, use your basting spray or adhesive spray or your pins to keep them in place. Go over to your sewing machine and stitch a basting stitch around the raw edge and go slow around those curves. This is a good warm-up because next we're going to be adding our side panels onto our main, and those curves can be fiddly. I like to work with my presser foot lifter as I'm going around the curves. If you want to give that a go too, make sure your needle is down before you lift the presser foot, and slowly move your fabric so it guides around. So we don't get any bunching, it's good to have an awl or snips handy to guide the remaining fabric smoothly under the presser foot. However you quilted your main fabric before, do so on your sides. If you decided to go with the hand ties, keep watching. I'm only going to put 2 on my side panel, and I've placed them accordingly to the print of the fabric. If you're not doing a pocket, 3 will be enough. The general rule is to have them a hand's distance length apart. Use your creative intuition to decide where your hand ties go. Next, you want to grab your side block and cut out the excess wadding and lining that's hanging off our main side. The main thing here is making sure the sides are straight. When you fold your side in half, the raw edges should be sitting flush and equal. Iron all your pieces. You should have 2 sides and your main body. Fold your sides in half and find out where the midway point is on the rounded edge side. Use your snips or pins to mark this point. If you're using your snips, make sure you cut within the seam allowance. It should only be 3 to 4 mils deep. Grab your main body and fold it in half. Once it's folded, use those 2 fold points to mark or pin where that halfway point is. Put right sides of your main fabric and right sides of your side panel together, meeting at the halfway mark. Put a pin or a clip to keep these points in place. Next, grab both corners and match them up together. Put a pin or a clip in place here as well. You can put more pins or clips between these 2 points if you like. Grab the other end of your corners and put a pin and clip in place there as well. Sew your side panel and your main body with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're sewing with thick fabric here, so take your time. When you get to the curve, keep going slow and ease that curve onto your main front. Easing a curve means carefully guiding the fabric around while sewing, so it lies flat without puckering. You're basically helping the fabric walk around the bend. In more simple terms, distribute the curvy part on the straight part, working backwards by pinching it in place with your fingers
to know how much you need to distribute to that space, sewing little bit by little bit, using your fingers all out to help feed it through along the way.
Keep going and don't forget to back tack. Nice work! You want to repeat this step on the other side as well. Now that both of our sides are sewn on, turn your cover right sides facing up.
And double check there isn't any major pleats or puckering.
Wow, it's looking really good.
Turn your sewing machine cover back to your lining side. Now we're going to trim the seam allowance down by 3 to 4 mils. That's roughly 1/8 of an inch. For easier trimming, place your side panel down on your bench and with your scissors carefully start to trim down that seam allowance. This will make it much easier to shape the curve neatly and apply the bias binding later. Continue trimming all the way around and on the other side. You do have the option to purchase your own pre-made bias binding. All your measurements are on page 1 of your paper pattern. Me personally, I like to make my own. If you are unsure on how to make your own bias binding or what it is, I'll add some links to help you. To find the bias, fold one corner of your fabric to create a triangle like this. Iron or pat down that folded edge to make it easier to work with. Grab your ruler and marker to mark in those strips parallel to the fold. Our first measurement is going to be half the width of our bias binding. All bias binding measurements are on page 1 of your paper pattern.
For our second measurement, we are going to do the full width of our bias binding.
From that first mark, keep going until you have enough strips. Go ahead and cut your strips out either with scissors or a rotary cutter. Cut your ends so that they are squared. I'm eyeballing it here, but if you want to use a ruler, go ahead and do that now. Place one strip on top of the other right sides together, like this. So you're kind of making a backwards L, and you have about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch hanging off either side. We are going to stitch down the middle like this. So you don't get confused, you can put a pin in place right now and just test to see if you have it correctly before stitching it on. Yep, that's correct. Jump on your sewing machine and sew your strips right side together until you have one long strip. Once all your bias binding strips are together, place them on your cutting table and you can trim off that excess fabric. And snip these little ones off too if you want. Open those seams by pressing them down with your iron like this. Fold your bias binding wrong sides together in half and also give that a good press. We are going to attach our bias binding on the lining side of our cover. With the folded edge of the bias binding facing away from the seam, line up the raw edges of your bias binding with the raw edges of your sewing machine cover. Sew them together with a 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that our bias binding is attached to our sewing machine cover seam, make 2 to 3 small snips into the seam allowance. Don't cut too deep, just enough to release the fabric. This will make it much easier to shape the curve neatly and to finish up our bias binding. For easier sewing, head over to your iron and press that seam flat and over to the side panel. Also, if you like, you can go ahead and put some clips or pins. Me personally, I like to just turn it while I'm on the sewing machine, but whatever is going to help you with the next step, go ahead and do that now. Alrighty, we're on to the next step, which is turning our bias binding over and stitching it down. Try to stitch as close as you can to that folded edge of the bias binding to secure it in place. And if you go off course, you can just lift up that presser foot and start again, but don't forget to back tack if you do. Do the same for the other side.
Okay, so now that our sides are complete, nice, we're going to turn your sewing machine cover right sides facing up. So we're going to work in the middle here. Grab your bias binding tape. Make sure you have a square folded edge
because we are going to place a bias binding onto your inside of your sewing machine cover. Before we do that, the start is the most important in order for us to come around and join the two tails together. With your ruler or tape measure, you want to start 2.5 inches, which works out to be 6.5 centimeters. And then you're going to fold this over. I like to start in the middle of one of your sides, and you can either get a pin or a clip and just pop it in place. Now when we actually start sewing our bias binding tape onto our inside of our cover, we are going to start 15.5 centimeters down from where we've just put our pin or clip. That works out to be, I believe, 6 inches for those who are doing inches. We are going to go 15.5. So here is where we're going to start sewing. With a 6mm seam allowance or 1/4 inch, start sewing your bias binding on to your sewing machine cover's raw edge. Don't forget to back tack. Just a heads up, we are going to stop stitching 15.5 centimeters or 6 inches from that first pin with the folded bias binding. Because this is quite thick, your sewing machine might struggle getting over it. So what we're going to do is grab a bit of fabric for a hump jumper and fold it about the same width as the bulk we're going to be sewing over. So sew as close as you can. Now my machine is going to struggle here, and I can already see that my foot is trying to go uphill. To get your foot back flat, make sure your needle is down all the way. Lift your foot up and slide your hump jumper underneath your foot. Now you already notice that your foot has become level again. Just go slow here. You might need to lift your foot up again and bring that again. Yeah, and that's simple. And then once you're over that, you can just keep sewing. Whichever way your seam allowance is pressed, keep it consistent for all the other side seams. For example, if the last seam was pressed towards the side panel, then press this one towards the side panel too. Alrighty, so you have made it all the way around back to our starting point. What you're going to do is you're going to stop stitching approximately 15.5 centimeters or 6 inches away from that folded, pinned or clipped starting point, which is about here. If you want, you can grab a little pen. I don't have any handy at the moment. I'm just going to make a little snip just so I know. And I'm going to stop at that little snip. If you've got a little bit extra of your tail, we're just going to trim off this excess, and where this pinned or clipped starting point is, we are just going to snip there. Bit scary, but you got this. Now you can go ahead and unpin this one, because what we're going to do, we are going to take these sides, and like we did when we joined our bias binding together before, we're just going to do the same. You might need to squish this if you want to make it a bit easier for you. Zooming in now, sorry buddies. So with right side on right side, if you want, you can grab one of your pins and pin it in place, because we're going to be sewing down this way. I'm going to draw this on just to show you where you're going to be stitching down. When you get here, it's always good to check there is no rolling and to open up your bias binding to make sure where you're stitching is going to be correct. This bit is quite fiddly, especially when you don't have much desk room like me at the moment. I'm right off the edge. We're ready to sew it. You will notice there's a bulky area where those seam allowances are. For easier sewing, grab your scissors and snip as close as you can without snipping the seam. This will just make it easier to turn over when we're on our sewing machine. Next, we are going to fold over our bias binding and stitch it onto the right side of our sewing machine cover. You have the option here to press your bias binding. I like to just do this when I'm at the sewing machine, but because we're here, we might as well do it. I don't know about anybody else, but I am really excited right now because this is the last step. I like to start in the middle of the side. For no particular reason, it's just for the back tacking. Because you don't really see the sides, you're mainly looking at the front. Stitch as close as you can to the folded edge of the bias binding, making sure it's all enclosed. Remember to use a hump jumper when you get to those bulky areas too. Head over to your ironing board and press down your work. You should be very proud of yourself.
Nice work, everybody. Now you can grab your cover and put it on your sewing machine. It's looking good. If you have any little bits that you want to trim off, you can go ahead and do that now. Give it a little haircut. Or you can leave it long. This is completely your preference. Thank you everybody for following along. Don't forget to tag me on the socials. I would love to see what you created. You know the drill. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'll be making more tutorials in the future. If you want to see something in particular, comment down below. And again, thanks heaps. See you next time.